Welcome to Carrier Wave.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Carrier Wave. This is the first behind-the-scenes podcast for Observable Radio. My name is Cameron Suey, and with me is the first person to say their name,
Phil Van Hest.
And then the second person to say their name,
Purpurina.
There we go. We are the three producers for Observable Radio, and sort of collectively the brain trust for making the episodes come out. And you, listening to this, are our patrons, people who have been kind enough to support this project as we've gone on, and we are extraordinarily grateful. And we wanted to sort of expose as much about the show as you might be interested in seeing.
Take it easy. Take it easy.
No, remember, they don't have the video. I've already written a little bit of a text post about our first episode, A Night Indoors. And I wrote sort of from my perspective on Patreon. But before we go on to talk about sort of future episodes, is there anything that you folks wanted to talk about that first episode? Because you both were involved, both voiced and talked about the production of it with me at the time.
Yeah, I wanted to hear more about, Phil, your initial reaction when Cameron came to you with this idea.
Oh, well, Cam comes to me with these ideas pretty much all the time. So I just say yes. I just say yes to everything. The weird part about this one is that he followed through and came up with a script for it. So that was a little confusing. But I'd been planning for this my whole life, so it was very easy to slip right into it. And as Cam mentioned in his little text article, we've been collaborating and goofing around for quite some time. So it was It was a nice, easy fit. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I forget what your question was.
No, that was the question. Like, what was your? I guess because being the observer. Right? Like, you are our wraparound. You're the guy carrying us through this whole story. And was there something about that was interesting to you? Like the wraparound piece, or was it the anthology? Like, what, I know you're on board for your buddy's thing, but
he's ride or die.
I imagine that there's also something about the project itself that you're attracted to too.
Yeah. Okay. I'm getting a clearer picture there. What's comical about that is when Cam approached me with this idea, the part that didn't make sense to me the most was how the found footage was going to be presented. So really, I think my heavy lift on the co-production end was saying, hey, what if there's a guy intercepting these signals and he's trying to send them to his other buddy? That way, that can be the thing that people are listening to. And Cam said, yeah, sounds great. That'll be you. And so, and Cam's very sweet. He
that's
said,
pretty much exactly how that went, yes.
He said, hey, if that's too boring, if you want to be other people, you can be other people. And then I said, what if someone who sounds just like me starts, being in the episodes randomly and it freaks me out? He's like, oh, that's cool. Let's do that. So I don't think that's happened yet. Do we have to cut that out?
Oh, no. That happened in episode 4, my good man. This very much is how my creative process works, is that I throw things at people, and if they throw things back, I'm excited to play catch with ideas. And yeah, Phil's right. I sort of had this vague idea that somebody is observing this. That was basically as much as I had. And Phil actually, even after our first initial, idea of this is a guy in a radio tower, Phil did a lot more character thinking about it than I did at first, and came back with some really interesting, and that's how we got to the idea of transmitting to somebody, and having a relationship with the character that I named as Trapper, which is sort of a placeholder at first that I love a lot now and is stuck forever. But yeah, that's really was Phil's major contribution before we even wrote the first script, was him talking about that framing and making sure that was something that was that he wanted to play, probably was the most important thing for him, but has a side benefit of making it a stronger character.
Side benefit.
With found footage, right? That is so important, does the wraparound work? Because it can be the make or break for a lot of audiences. When we're talking about movies, why are they still recording? All those questions.
Yes. Yeah.
I felt the pressure of that a lot the first time I recorded my first set, and I made Cam let me redo it several times because I felt the pressure of this will be the first person they listen to. If they're not into this guy, then it's going to be a tough, potentially tough. I don't want to be something everyone skips through at the beginning of the podcast.
Right, like an extension of the credits and the previews.
So I was hoping to not be something that we skip through at the beginning. That's my main goal. I'm revealing this to you now. That's my goal. To not be skipped.
I think one of the only major rewrites that we've ever done on a script so far was on your intro and outro, and that was you and I together rewriting
for the first one, because I was like, whoa. After I heard the episode, I was like, I had already recorded my lines and I had to go back and do them again. Cause like I need to have heard what this episode is before I do my lines. Yeah, that was a big one.
And I think especially with our very first episode, I didn't know what it was going to look like. So I was writing your lines in sort of isolation as well. I think now we both know what an episode of Observable Radio looks like, and you can read the script and go, yeah, I can react appropriately to this without having to sort of imagine what it looks like. Do you guys want to? I don't want to interrupt. But
Purpurina,
do you guys want to start talking about episode 2?
Well, Purpurina, it's my turn. What brought you in? Because I know you were involved early on, and just to let everyone really behind the curtain, this is the first time you and I are meeting face to face, although the room I'm recording this in is very dark. I'm very sorry. This is what I look like. I'm trying to get my face nice and close to the podcast here.
It's so funny that you're saying that.
What finally drew you in?
It's funny that you're saying that about your face, because you actually have your face publicly and I do not. So the listeners won't know me at all.
I am look-upable. It's true.
But yeah, no, so golly, I can't even remember the first conversation really. But Cameron had sent me this message like, I have this idea, and I was like,
does this sound familiar?
This sounds dope as hell. I'm down to help, however I can. I impulse bought a microphone early in the pandemic like a bunch of other people, I did high school theater. I can say a couple lines, And the thing is, Cameron and I talk a lot about just various creative projects, like, since we've become friends. So it's normal for us to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Bounce ideas off each other. So
Yeah,
soundboard.
To let actually a further curtain reveal, Purpurina and I have been friends for a long time. This is absolutely the longest time we've ever spoken with our human voices. Mm-hmm. We've been friends almost entirely over text and chat. So this is the longest I've spent exhaling air through my meat and wobbling it around to communicate that way.
Oh, we should put a link to that in the notes.
So I both of you are people that I bounce ideas off of. So even before I knew that we were actually going to make the show, I was throwing spaghetti at both of you and getting meatballs and such back. And, like Phil mentioned, I have a propensity for coming up with lots of ideas and being excited about them and not entirely following through with them. But the fact that we just finished and are about to release our 8th episode, it'll be out by the time this airs, and that we're recording a Patreon behind-the-scenes podcast for that show is I'll just take a moment and be excited for all of us. That's pretty incredible.
I was going to say unexpected, but yeah, incredible also.
Yeah.
Unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, here we are. Early on, there was a very loose feeling to it, as I was just like, what are we doing? Let's get people to do this. But as we've solidified, the three of us have sort of become the production team, where we talk about what's going on each month, talk about the story, review the script, and then do casting and that sort of stuff. And that's the way it's been for the past couple of episodes, at least. But if you guys don't mind, let's roll back in time to Transmission A.02. These transmissions at one point were called Transmission X.01 until Purpurina rightfully pointed out that X is not cool anymore.
X is not cool anymore.
And probably won't be for a very long time. So A.02, Cattle Drive. Cattle Drive was one of the original ideas that I came up for when I did a brainstorming session of episodes, where I wrote down about 15 ideas that probably 10 of those will end up being final episodes. But the idea for Cattle Drive was very simply a world in which prisoners are food and treated as food. And I think It's an episode that, looking back on it now, it's one that a lot of people point to as like, maybe the first episode didn't resonate with everybody. Maybe not everyone's as interested in obscure War of the Worlds
intriguing,
takes.
right? It was intriguing. Like, what is this? But then the second one really popped for people.
Cattle Drive is a very deliberate twist.
Can I ask you a question about Cattle Drive?
Please.
There's a part where he's getting sentenced. What's his name? And the judge is like, you and all your progeny, or you and all your issue. What does he say? So
he says issue.
So does the whole family get sent? Like
I'm making a dirty face here because it's awful, and I sometimes write things down and I think I'm not going to have to account for this. But yes, accounting for this. my idea was that once people went into the cattle system, that they probably were bred as well. And I wanted to imply that there was a future for that as well. And I'm feeling dirty having said it.
Can I just jump in?
Please?
Really quick. Because one, consistently from strangers that we get feedback on, as well as friends and family that have listened to the episodes, everybody says, dude, that second episode, holy shit, right? Like,
yeah.
And I really feel like it's our to serve man.
To serve.
Yes, very, very much so, in a lot of ways. And to look back, we released Cattle Drive and A Night Indoors on the same day. At one point, I was only going to release one episode, but I am so glad that we released both these at the same time. They are both our shortest episodes. Every episode other than this is about 20 minutes long. These are both 13, but they are very, very, very different. And having them come out side by side, I think, was a pretty smart choice. Pat on the back for us. But yeah, it is something that is short, sharp, and nasty. And I think when I look back on this is one of the ones that feels the most like a found footage film that I was trying to chase. And that what I mean by that is, this episode is full of stuff that feels banal or normal or dry, that only once you understand the secret, or, in a found footage thing, or once you see the thing in the corner, right, essentially, that changes the whole context of what you've been listening to. So as I went back and reviewed the script for this, I was kind of surprised by how dry some of these scenes are. But there is this sort of dread in their being dry, because that that's not just a phone call between two people talking about a cattle herd. What I wanted was something where once the shoe dropped, that you would have to think back about every other scene and be like, oh no! I wanted a sort of a rolling series of feelings like that. And I feel like we got pretty close to it. Yeah, it's very much that found footage Skinamarink feeling of having you lean closer and closer to something that doesn't quite make sense yet.
I'm going to have to apologize. I still haven't watched that movie show.
I will here and now say that it's
many times.
It is not for everybody, and probably not for anybody besides maybe 100 people. You could probably I'm doing it a disservice because it's an incredible film, but I think it's probably got a niche audience.
Yes,
for a reason.
Yeah, if it's for you, it is incredibly for you. And if it's not, it's not. I have heard
and you'll know real fast.
Middling takes where it's like, okay, I'm not mad I watched it, but I'll never watch it again.
Like Meet the Feebles?
No.
Philip, no.
What? Is it? I feel like that's the territory we're in.
No. It's challenging. It's avant-garde.
Okay.
It's more. It's if you don't like slow burn, you are going to crawl out of your skin, not from fear but from boredom. With Skinamarink.
The argument that it's a boring movie. I'm going to cut this because I like the movie too much to say it. But you could make an argument that it's a boring slow movie. But it just is one that requires like attention like this, and when it does pay off, it is like a big old thump.
All right, thank you.
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna back on. So the other thing about Cattle Drive is that it's the human beings are meat is not a new idea, right? I mean, this goes back to Soylent Green, and one of our patrons recommended a novel, Tender is the Flesh, to me, which has a similar setup to ours, which is a pandemic causes the need for human meat.
Not just a plane crash.
So it's not
like normal.
Like normal.
like normal cannibalism.
Just
acceptable
regular,
cannibalism.
regular cannibalism.
Acceptable day-to-day.
Everyday cannibalism. And it's not a new idea, but it is one that is just sort of inherently and sort of atavistically unpleasant, I think, that people resonate with it is just such an inherently upsetting idea. Yeah. Now, this is another episode, I think, where I was still figuring out how to make sound and process it. The first episode is almost entirely over the radio. It's one processing, with the exception of the walkie-talkies. But this episode I was trying to branch out and try a whole bunch of different stuff. That is the echoey courtroom microphone, but also the telephone call, which is something that once I figured out how to do it, we happily used in the future as well, because it's sort of an instantly authentic analog sound that we all sort of recognize as that sort of mid-quality sound of the walkie-talkie.
You've had a hell of a learning curve on the editing sound effects.
I started off this project only knowing how to edit basically just room tone out and putting pieces together like assembly editing. So it's been discovery the whole way. And a lot of times I've started writing bits, and I think we'll talk about those in the future, writing bits where I wanted to challenge myself to try something. But this was another one where there was a couple of new types of things. This is the first time we did a commercial. As well as the first time we did music.
Which, can I comment on that really quick? I've already told you this. I'm from Texas, and literally, when I first heard the whole commercial, I was like, this is making me homesick?
Oh, no.
I could see this being like a Whataburger commercial.
It was sort of a thing where I was like, eventually we'll have to do advertisements, so I'll just have someone reading copy over this sort of, country rock sound. But one of our actresses who was in our first episode, Katie Scoveholt, I noticed that she had put on her audition sheet that she was a singer. And so I asked her to sort of improv a tune. With the slogan, lasso yourself up a cattle burger. And she came back with that incredible, like, harmony mixed 3-track version that we put a yeehaw and a whip sound to. And I'll put this in the show notes, but the whole song we put up on SoundCloud because it's very funny and it's very listenable because it does sound very much like a realistic ad. I think also this is one of the points where I realized that sometimes pulling our punches is our best move. We made a 1 and 25-second cattle burger ad, but we only use probably about 10 seconds of it in the episode. And I actually, there's a part where we fade out in the middle of Katie singing, which at first I was like, I can't do that. She sang for us. We paid for that.
You're a big softy like that. It's true.
I am. But I feel like, especially when we treat stuff like commercials and stuff as forgettable even within the texture of the world, it makes it feel more authentic.
Yeah, it makes it deeper, richer, and not that it's a throwaway in any way, but like that you took the time to piece together that, and then there's obviously more of it. It just gives you the feeling that there's more to everything that you're hearing, and helps round out a lot of the stuff. And I think that one of the attractions to our show has been that people get to invest themselves.
Yeah.
They don't have everything handed to them directly, so they get to fill in the gaps on their own. And I found from a lot of the feedback that to be one of the most effective tools in our bucket, is letting people immerse themselves in the world and not shoving all the exposition at them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, seeing people say that has been so unbelievably gratifying for me, because that was my intent. Is I love the idea of variable depth of things. Be like, hey, look, you can come as deep along on this story as you want. When we talk about the commercial, if we had brought it on and done a whole song and dance and been like, look what we made, it would have lost the impact as part of the world, where it was we just barely peeked, pulled a curtain back and you saw this fully formed commercial for a split second. And I think it does give that feeling of a wider background.
We're sticking
to
eps 1 and 2 for this, right?
No, we're going to go on to 3 in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I'm just about done talking about 2. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about too?
I mean, I think just to add to the pulling the punch aspect is throughout the episodes, especially as the 3 of us have talked more and more, we try to keep an eye on what things make it feel real and where can we play a little bit more. And I think with the commercial, you're right. Like, it's such a fun tune, but also I know every time I have to watch an ad, I get existential and zone out and I don't want to listen to it. And I'm like, I'm wasting during these 30 seconds of my life, And it would be the same for the people in these universes.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I like making advertisements more than I should is something that I've discovered about this. There's an easiness to...
Yeah, that's how we started our podcast relationship.
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
It was me doing fake ads for you.
Yes. I think we talked about this prior, but my last podcast before this was a Willow TV show watch-along in which I brought Phil on to do in-universe ads for things like brownie repellent.
Blackroot.
Among other things.
Right.
Yeah. And ads just for Blackroot. Just like a public service
Well, we
announcement.
can segue into 3, but 2 is when I started.
There's one thing I wanted to say.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I'll allow it.
The
Go
one
ahead.
last thing
Whenever
I wanted to
you're
say.
ready. Go ahead.
I'll do.
Yep. When you...
The one last thing I wanted to say about 2 was that I think after this, I made a deliberate choice that I wanted to avoid some of the bigger gotcha twists. And, I think some of our episodes after this do sort of hinge on small reveals, but I think this is our biggest one that is a sort of a Sixth Sense level pivot in the last segment.
Right, and you didn't want to pigeonhole yourself in there's gonna be a reveal.
And I actually really thought, these were the first 2 scripts completed. I figured that this would be much more of the guideline for other things, would be, big pivot reveals like this. But I think having done it once, it was more fun to try to do it different ways.
I will say, though, as much, and I think this is just part of any time you are so much working on a project, you will never be able to anticipate how the audience receives it. And there is always it may not be a reveal, but some kind of gut punch that sometimes we're even surprised by the feedback when people are like, holy shit. And we're like,
yes.
Yeah, that was on purpose. Totally.
One last thing about Cattle Drive is that before it launched, I had forgotten about this, but before it launched, I was 100% convinced that everybody would guess the twist early.
Sure.
And I hemmed and hawed about it. And then even as it went out, I went, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. The title gives away the twist. And fortunately, that was mostly just an artifact of me being so deeply inside my own head and editing it for so many days that it seems like most people felt the twist at the moment they were supposed to, or just beforehand. So I'm very gratified that I don't have a good sense of when the audience picks up on things like that. Okay, so our next episode, Transmission A.03, was large models. This came from a root idea that was ever slightly more complicated than the previous ones. My idea here was sort of always 2 parts. One, that AI being so optimized that it only talks to other AI, that's the most efficient way it can do its job. And that the idea that in the margins, there would be people saying, excuse me, I need help. And that was really just a sort of 2-pronged idea for this episode. But going back and listening at it now, I realized that this is our first episode that has a story arc. It has characters, it has a beginning, a middle scene, and an end, and it has a flow of a narrative. And we
didn't care for it.
You didn't like it?
Sorry.
What? This is the first I'm hearing of this. What I'm thinking here is I think that ever since then, every episode has had a fairly clear narrative.
It's been getting clearer and clearer, especially compared to episode 1, which was like, good luck, fuckers.
Yeah.
And now it's like, yeah, we're telling, we've settled into telling a story.
And I think a broken record, again, I think a lot of this is just that as we do each episode and as we learn a little bit more about how to do it and as we get a little bit more confident, we know how to do the thing we did okay the last time better. And then we try new things and we do them okay. And then we do them better. And I think I've been really pleased with sort of the forward progression of that. I want to do one quick digression here is that you had talked about, how audiences review this. When we were talking about these episodes, I was still editing these particular episodes in private in a dark room.
Yeah, we didn't have an audience.
And I was then sending you guys basically finished episodes. And you guys were like, okay, here's a couple of ideas. We have since changed to what I think is a much better formula, which is that as I edit individual scenes, we go over them, which allows for a lot more granular feedback. And it has very specifically, and I think we'll probably talk about this a lot in the next Carrier Wave, there was a scene where we have physical action, gunshots and bodies dropping, and getting the understanding of how that action was something that I wasn't able to do on my own. So having, specifically in that case, Purpurina listen to it and be like, hey, somebody exhales when they die. So like, you need that sound before the body drops. So the spacing out of that sort of stuff was something that, I never would have done correctly on my own. So now that I've opened up that process, I think we're getting even better results.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more, because yes, there's the AI theme, which not AI as a concept, but AI.
Do we want to clarify our AI opinions on this podcast? Or is that dangerous?
I'm about to clarify
Okay.
mine. I think currently, as it exists in practice, there's a lot of unethical, unthought about aspects to it. So for me, I'm very like, not going to take part in it, not going to do it. In the Beef Carlo thing, I went to great lengths to find a text-to-speech that was not AI, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was already a compelling idea to me, but when I listened through and maybe even read through some of the stuff, I was surprised by the climate aspect. So I wanted to ask you about that piece too.
Yes. Yeah, actually, that's really interesting because I had this as a thing to talk about. Climate was not an original idea that I had in this. One of the things that I've come to do with my writing is I trust my sense of improvisation. In a lot of cases, I'll just say, in this scene, I know that these things have to happen, and I will just sort of free write a lot of stuff. And in this case, a couple of times, as I was free writing the AI talking about the conditions of the world, I initially had the AI talking about how the air quality was really good, that the parts per million were low. Because what I was thinking is, there ain't nobody outside. Everybody's already dead at this point. But then I later had an AI tell the temperature is 127 degrees, and I realized that I probably was, if I was improvising it more than once, I was probably saying something subconscious. And I think what I was trying to say there is that climate specifically and existential threats specifically are something that, as we talk about AI, make me even more frightened, because I don't think that an AI is the proper tool used to address emergent and adaptive threats. So my idea was that these AI, who in this world are a little bit more advanced than the models in our world and have been, allowed to run things. We talk about the 2 7-year plans at one point for, 10 or 15 years or so, that at no point have they pivoted or adapted to the emerging threats, that they are very, very good at doing what they were initially set out to do, and that they adapt within those particular things that they're told to do. But an AI does not give a shit about the weather. That does not affect them in the slightest. So there's no way that became part of their adaptive concern.
Were you thinking it's an extrapolation of the paperclip problem? Like you assign it to make paperclips and you don't give it any more parameters except you make the most efficient paperclips in the best way possible, and then the world is destroyed.
Yes, exactly that. Because I do talk about that the AI have reduced crime, and then I make it awful by saying that they arrest people. There's other times where I talk about potentially positive things that the modeling has done, but I wanted the idea to be that they are so focused on whatever their initial goals were that they no longer notice what has changed. So my personal opinion about AI is largely tied up in my opinion about global economic systems. If we lived in fully automated robot luxury communism, I would think it would be pretty neat, and I would probably play with it a lot. We don't. We live in capitalism, and I have certainly made my share of please generate a picture of Indiana Jones looking constipated on a public bus, because I thought that'd be funny. But I think that using it in artistic projects where you might otherwise have contracted with a human artist is where I start to get uncomfortable. And I realize, we can talk about John Henry and steam shovels, but I think there's an ethical drive that I have to make sure that people get jobs. And that people and artists especially continue to work. So in keeping with our opinions about AI, we also really made it clear at the beginning of this episode that we did not ever want to use a synthesized voice, even if 95% of the cast was supposed to be synthesized voices.
Yeah, that's right. I remember this consternation.
Actually, I'm remembering now that one of the original ideas, the original premises for this episode is I was wondering, would it be ethical to use AI to make historical figures? Like, what if we wanted to get
Sure.
George W. Bush talking about the alien invasion of 97? Would that be ethical to use AI there? And I think what we all decided was if we could pay a voice actor $5 to do an impression, that would be a better choice. Mm-hmm. And thinking of that, I was like, well, hang on. What if I wanted to get voice actors to pretend to be an AI? And so that was accomplished in this episode by asking all of the actors to take huge pauses before any noun that might have been automatically inserted into their sentence structure from somewhere else, and to make sure that they didn't breathe on microphone. So I sort of surgically went through and removed all of their breathing, and then made it so that anytime they talked...
Sounds so weird to say it like that. I surgically removed their breathing.
Oh my God, I didn't...
That's how you sound. That's you. That's what you sound like.
I frequently don't know how horrifying I am. This is an ongoing challenge for me.
The mirror, as it were, Cameron. You are welcome.
The effect of dropping or removing the space around the noun sort of creates this sort of dislocation in the words. And it was one of those things where I was like, maybe I'll try this. And the first time I did it with the first actor, I was like, bingo, that's it. That is an AI. That sounds incredible. I really loved how it turned out. And I really love the sort of dry humor of multiple AIs talking to each other, where neither of them realizes that they're talking about a deceased person.
Yes.
Because they're just hearing the database entry, user deceased. And they're just assuming that's the person's name. That's a sort of very dark comedy that I like.
I thought it was very funny.
This was the first funny one, right?
Time to go make a casserole.
Did we make the observer point this out? I was like, I have to notice that this one is different.
I think we pointed out that this one feels
close.
Frighteningly close to our world,
close.
as opposed to Cannibalism Land, which feels a little bit further afield. But yes, the observer does directly point that out in this one, that this one feels close. We talked a little bit about doing the sitcom for this. That was a new sound style. And again, something I thought was really fun to piece together out of different clips of audience reactions and that sort of stuff. Alistair Stewart of Pseudopod, who is an old friend of mine, was the father bot in that. And that was the first time he appeared on the show. It was really fun to have him on it. But that is a very surreal segment that after I edited, I think I sent it to you guys and I said, I think I'm having a stroke after I finished it. It felt so divorced from reality once I listened to it all together. There's something somebody said about this episode is, obviously this sitcom is no longer funny as it's breaking down for the intent. It's no longer making accurate jokes, but they have to wonder, was it ever funny? And I firmly believe that an endless perpetual sitcom written by an AI probably could not be funny.
Sometimes the ones written by humans are not.
There's got to be filler. There's got to be filler material, right? You gotta get your quotas in. There's got the air can't be dead. You got channels with stuff that needs to go in it. Like
somebody's got to watch something.
Catchphrase.
Who's been at a hotel recently? There's 1,000 of those channels, so the AI is going to be pumping content out of every spigot it has access to in any number of different permutations. And who cares if who's watching it? That's not the point.
Yeah. It's not about enjoyment. No. It's about passive watching. I think I made the point to somebody that I technically don't see too much difference between an AI writing an action movie and 6 executives using market research to write an action movie. Like it's not terribly different to me. It's still that same sort of, it turns it more into a commercial process.
I know that the AI discussion has been mostly artistic in the circles I run in, but just to get my personal take on it across, it's another bend in the road in the world of big tools. AI is the newest, craziest, most versatile tool we've encountered in a long time, and can be used for great harm and hopefully great good in terms of, making new vaccines and new, building you a new prosthetic limb that you can control with your mind and whatnot. There's all kinds of good things, but currently what it is Spotify trying to get me to listen to their weird DJ and Google constantly trying to get me to use their beta AI something for something or other. And get what?
I would optimistically agree with you about the potential and the potential for any tool. And I think the problem there is that it's the market forces that those tools are being
it's the synthetic,
directed under.
The synthetic evil of market
you
forces.
You say people, I say capitalism.
It's one way or the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what I mean when I said earlier, like the practical existence of it, the actual real world.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Because conceptually cool.
Yeah.
Right up there with
centaurs everywhere,
and teleporters and shit, like whatever. But no, instead we have. Can we replace therapists with a chat GPT?
Right. Yeah. We're replacing all the wrong jobs with AI. And I think that comes down to the market forces of who wants to make money quickest using the newest tool. Okay, so the new sound styles we added the sitcom. The other thing that I sort of clarified in this episode that I didn't realize until looking back on it is that most of our episodes in the interstitials, every episode is roughly composed of 6 scenes with interstitials. Every episode so far has had a character in the interstitials who doesn't necessarily exist in the other scenes. And then in this episode is the first time where I sort of solidified the idea that that character is frequently a contrarian to the worldview. There's a contrarian voice in episode 1, but there's not a contrarian voice in Cattle Drive. There's the preacher who's sort of... Oh, there is a contrarian voice.
There is a contrarian. The interviewed lady.
Contrarian, contradict
excuse
thyself.
Correct. The contrarian role takes place in an entire scene there with the anti-cattle activist. You're right. So in episode 3, there's a character called Meat Mind, who is the contrarian character in this, who is played by Brian Holler, who's an old friend of ours from high school. One of the wonderful things about this project has been meeting incredible high caliber voice actors and casting them, and then also casting goofy friends from high school alongside them. They tell me that's called directing.
Some of those goofy friends are kicking ass, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, they're killing it. So Brian Holler plays Meat Mind in this episode, the character who's sort of speaking out against the AI. One of the things that's important for me about these contrarian voices is that I don't want them to be 100% correct. I don't want them to be the voice that's saying...
You mean correct to
my point of
contemporary
view.
American society 2024 cultural...
Correct to my moral framework. I don't want the contrarian to be my voice saying, look how terrible it is that these people do this. I want that contrarian...
That would be gross if you did that.
Well, it would be easy. It would be cheap.
That's what I said.
I want that contrarian voice to also be not necessarily risible, but also be not entirely consistent. And it's something I realize that is developing slowly over the course of it. But in a more recent episode that isn't even out yet, I think we do something a little more interesting with the contrarian voice and tie it back into the bigger story. But I think it's a role that I'm interested to see it develop as we write these episodes, because I didn't intend for that to occur
instead of it
at the
just
beginning.
being
The
contrarian voice in the wilderness type thing. It'll have more relative impact.
Yeah. The other thing about this episode is that anytime there's a name for something, like the band or the songs, in keeping with the AI theme, I went to a random word generator and I tried to find the absolute least evocative combination of words, like things that just moved nothing within my soul. So we came up with the band name Uncle Competition, or the song is called Uncle Competition, and the band is Paper Village Psychics. And I really enjoyed how flat and tasteless those came out.
Each word knocks itself down in the face of the word that comes next, so that no building is possible.
Right. It's lesser than the sum of its parts.
Can we make Paper Village Psychic stickers?
We should.
Oh my god! If somebody can make a perfect Paper Village Psychics icon, that's just the right level of. Did I even see that? Yeah, I will make stickers. 100%.
Hey, I'll do it. I'm the sticker. Just kidding.
Okay, yeah.
I'm in charge of
Phil is the sticker
ordering
guy.
stickers.
Really quick, just on the topic of like character names and stuff, shout out to the fact that from the jump, just about, you've included transcripts on the website. So if anybody is ever like, I don't know the characters' names, go to the website, man.
I'm going to take that shout out and I'm going to judo reverse it right back onto Alistair Stewart, who, before we started this, as I was like, I'm about to start a podcast and I'm a big dum-dum. What do I do? One of the things he said to me is, do your transcripts early and have those so that you don't have to struggle to get them later. So we've had transcripts from the start. Yeah, character names, I look back at the very first script and the characters are announcer, dispatch, police, man, voice. Our character names have definitely got a lot more silly and a lot more evocative to where we get, Meat Mind by the time of this episode, or Beef Carlo. Our latest.
Long live Beef Carlo.
Yes, Beef Carlo origins. And then finally, one more thing I wanted to say about the music in this episode is that it's a very delicate position to be in, to try to find music that is just the right amount of not good. Like all these songs I wanted to find that were like very well constructed, but sort of empty in a way. And what I thought was very funny about a lot of the songs that I ended up finding is in the notes for the songs from the individual composers, frequently they would say, this was a test to myself to see how bland of a song I could make. So I was actually finding stuff that they knew was sort of bland and flat to begin with. So I was very glad to find that because it made it, I felt less guilty about choosing these tracks specifically for this joke of being the Paper Village Psychic song.
Turnout was really low this year for the Intentionally Bland Music Conference, and I'm still not sure why, because the people who are committed, they're trying to outdo each other. The people that show blandness.
Up, you don't remember seeing them. You just forget they were there. So one final thing that I wanted to say about this episode is that this is the first time that we moved the Observer story forward, where he starts to say, hey, I'm maybe not doing great. And I think, I don't know, I'm going to admit this. It was around this time that I realized I really need to formally know exactly where the Observer storyline goes. I knew always where it was going to end, but I didn't really have a clear sense of an arc to get there. So this was at the point where I said, Philip, no spoilers.
No. Sorry, everyone. Death awaits you.
We can neither confirm nor deny
that people die. Yeah. Let's not come down on one side or another of that.
It might be worse than death. I mean, just really, really quick. Like one of my favorite things about us.
It might be worse than death.
One of the funny, it's never not great when we are workshopping stuff because we're essentially like, oh, that's fucked up. Put it in the show.
Yeah, that is a very frequent thing is we'll throw out a premise and then somebody else will say, within that premise, it would be the fucking worst. And then someone else will say, that's now part of the show. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty good path of our production. Yeah, so at this point I sat down and I very clearly wrote out episode by episode where the Observer was going to go. And I have not deviated from that in the last 5 episodes. And I don't think that we will as we approach the end. But one of the feedback I got pretty fast after this episode and the next one, episode 4, was, holy shit, that story is moving. Because I think most people just assumed it was going to comfortably sit. And I think that that was very gratifying because I think that's the right thing to do. So, and I also think that Phil, you have appeared in episodes. We'll talk about that in the next episode as other trans-dimensional versions of yourself, but you're primarily in this one role and this one character. And if it was boring and it went nowhere, that would be a waste of your time. It would suck.
Disservice to me. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it would be really easy to treat him like a crypt keeper kind of character where, I'm just a guy in a tower. Look at this weird shit.
And I think you can see some hints of me almost.
Is it too late for that?
Like setting myself comfortably up for that with the catchphrase opening. If you're listening to this, please stop. I think there's the hints of me trying to set up a comfortable sort of, hey, we're just going to keep doing this week after week. But instead, that's become a weird sort of frightened mantra every time you start transmitting, which I like better.
That's what I'm going to do next time. If you're listening to this, please stop. This is not for you. All right, let's do it. That's it. That's all you're getting.
Yeah. I think originally there was one concept for this idea that the twist would be that the whole thing was being recorded and that the podcast you were listening to as a listener was being surreptitiously recorded against the Observer's will. And I think that got so convoluted for me that I fell asleep at one point.
Yeah, you just incepted yourself into unconsciousness.
Yeah. I think actually that's one final thing. One of the things I want to do is I want to keep a very strict distinction between the show and the business of the show. I think there are a lot of shows that blend that very cleverly and very smartly. I didn't want to do that at all. I wanted the show to exist inside the beginnings and ends of its transmission. There's a hard click in and out on the sound design that lets you know when the show has started. And then outside of that, we could be playful and goofy and stupid, but inside of that is where the show exists.
Yeah, it's already got enough going on in there.
Folks, is there anything else you guys want to say about Transmission 2 or 3 or the process getting up to that point?
I mean, so much. I could go on and on. I have been surprised to learn that people are actually interested in the creative process of putting these sorts of things together. So I think it's... I was surprised to learn that it was going to be interesting information. the to me, the humdrum procedural movements of the script from one place to another. And for myself, feeling out my role as co-producer, there's no definition of that you can look up. There's not a training session you can go to. It was about being more proactive, finding voice actors who would be better suited to pieces of the script after I was able to see the script sooner and say, okay, I know who would be good for this, or let's try this person in this role, or et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't assign myself that. It was just something I felt compelled to do.
And I think, Episode 8 is so much more complex and convoluted than Episode 1, but I think it took the exact same amount of time for me to edit and put it together. And the huge reason of that is because you two have taken on so much other stuff, like helping me edit the scripts ahead of time, helping me do casting and that sort of thing. So I'm very grateful for that. And I think that feeling of feeling like, of course, nobody wants to see behind the curtains. I think that comes from a place of sort of imposter syndrome and low self-esteem that artists are given by default by society as we leave our colleges or whatever. And I think that's not necessarily true. I think the fact that people are listening to this right now, which, if a tree falls in a woods, if you're hearing this, you're listening to this, it means they cared enough to hear more about this. So I also struggle with that idea that people want to know about the silly ideas in our heads, but I think people do. And I also would love people to, if they want to know specific stuff, just reach out, because I think it's something that's very clear is we love jawing about this stuff as much as we love doing it.
I can't wait for answering readers' questions section. Sorry, go ahead.
Let me be a little contrarian and say I knew people, if people signed up for the Patreon, they would love this, because think how many people have multiple copies of the same movie because there's different extras on it. Behind the scenes
and I'm the same way. I support stuff, and I seek out behind the scenes information of stuff I care about. The idea that someone would ever feel that way about something I did is just something I have trouble understanding.
You guys, believe in yourselves.
I always associated imposter syndrome with those times when I'm in an impressive looking professional space and I feel like I don't deserve to be here. But it's really hard to have that feeling when I've got my piano stool on top of my table with the laptop on it, recording my lines, hoping none of the kids come in while I'm recording. Like, it's really hard to feel like an imposter of what? Like,
friend, that is professional podcasting. You've made it right there.
Yeah, the addition of the stool is what really sells it to myself.
Should we do a couple of questions before we close out?
Oh, hell yeah.
All right, so our first question comes from That Moffat Nerd, and they ask, while the conjunction of both the Red River and Grand Forks are not a big indicator, was a portion of the Christmas episode taking place in the horrible, frozen, desolate wasteland of North Dakota, or am I looking too far into things? Yes. 100%. That was North Dakota.
Tell him what he's won.
One of the things that I have long... Ding, 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 ding. One of the things that I've long done when I'm writing things that take place in a specific location or that feel localized is that I will go to Google Maps, I will find the place I'm writing about, I will look at Street View, I will walk around, I will look at reviews for different shops, I will take a virtual tour of the town. And I often will choose places totally at random and then just flesh it out as I go. But yeah, the holiday episode, very specifically, I wanted it to take place on the northern border of America, where we'll talk more about this on a future episode. I wanted it to take place on the northern border of America against some sort of other country, and where we, of course, discovered that's where the elves are located. But yes, so I picked out... I forget what city I picked out in North Dakota, but every street that the person mentions is a real street. You know, I feel, at least for me, it feels like I'm being authentic and consistent to a place. I think if somebody's never been there, they don't care. It just sounds like street names. But for me, it always feels like a nice way of rooting it in reality.
The first time I read House of Leaves, I had moved... I had just moved to LA a year or two before, and I know for a fact that had I not had some like familiarity with the place's name, it would have been completely different. So I think that attention to detail really, like, more than just, oh, shout out to this place I know. Like, I think you're right. Like, it absolutely grounds it for listeners.
And my goal is always that somebody from that place will be like, holy shit, you know, and recognize it. That would be the best.
Counterpoint, aren't these worlds supposed to be alternate realities of some sort, of alternate places? I mean, I'm just being a dick, but yeah.
No, but I think you're. I'm going to take your dick question. I'm going to answer it sincerely. No, I think as much as possible, I try to make the unsaid stuff in these worlds match ours. And I think when we get further afield and we do other episodes, they branch more strongly from this world. But yeah, I think there are times where I definitely want to lean in on comfort and coziness and recognizability.
Mm-hmm. I'm really excited for future Carrier Wave episodes where we can talk a little bit more about the pushing and pulling of connection to how similar are they, how alternate history are they, because it's been fun. And there's one episode in particular where we kind of had this conversation of, wait, why do we have to stick with our shitty history? Let's change some shit up.
Oh, I'm excited about that because it still has to be a world that's terrible. But yeah, we don't have to reproduce every terribleness that we are aware of.
There have been hints of that already. There have been a couple hints of that. Yeah. I'm
very excited about that. As you're listening to this, listeners, if there's things that you specifically want to hear about upcoming episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll make sure that we include those when we talk about them. So let's do one more question and then we'll wrap it up for the night.
Sounds good.
Laura asks, how do you decide on a topic and themes for each show? And do you ever feel swayed by current events? For instance, have you ever written a script in mind, opened Twitter, saw something that made your skin crawl, and just wrote about that instead?
I mean, kind of the opposite. Well, sometimes, like, we saw that Michael's The Craft Store released as part of their training materials I'm not kidding, an active shooter word search puzzle.
Oh, no.
And we were like, we write shit like this, and then the real world is like, hey, guess what?
Hold my beer.
It's worse.
We're worse. Yeah. Yeah. There's a famous tweet about the Torment Nexus. Science fiction author says, I wrote this book, The Torment Nexus, as a warning against the Torment Nexus. And then the company says, finally, we've created the Torment Nexus. I joked that our show is sort of Torment Nexus of the week a lot of the times.
Torment Nexus adjacent.
But I do, I do think that I tend to try to avoid super cutting edge current ideas. AI, I think, is the closest we got. And I think I wrote that as quickly as possible as AI news was happening because I wanted to get it out. Well, I wanted to get it out with my original thoughts and not have it be
before it became too true.
I think for the most part, all of these ideas come from sort of seed ideas, and those seed ideas generally come from things that I'm currently upset about or concerned about. But when it comes to very specific current events, I think so far my move has been to back off or to try to make it more metaphorical rather than address it directly. And I think part of that is not wanting to be up to date on every single thing that happens, and be, true to every single adjustment of a new issue. But part of that is also not wanting to feel immediately dated and try to feel a little bit more universal and try to think about, how would this have felt 10 years ago if it had developed for 10 years and not a cutting edge thing and it was something we'd all accepted. So I really do try to prevent current cutting edge things. I'll do one little side bit here, and I don't want to do too much into it because I still think it was a good idea. And I think that maybe it's something we may want to revisit in the future. But 9 years ago, Phil and I and some other folks had an idea for a narrative podcast that we started to write. And that was during an election season. And part of our story hinged on an election possibility that we didn't think was at all possible. And then reality said, ha to our poor little liberal imaginations. And what was wouldn't it be fucked up if sort of a pivot in one of our stories became just the world we were living in. So there's a full script for that episode and storyline that are, and that story goes to different places. That was a tiny detail. But I felt so one-upped by reality in that moment that I put that story aside for a while. So I have tended to avoid direct causal connections to history right now.
I think there's another aspect as well, which is the spirit of this behind the scenes is we're just trying to have fun. So we're trying to pull in horror elements and sci-fi elements of things we genuinely enjoy watching and reading and listening to, and then hopefully create creating that for other people to listen to, so that, yes, it's horrifying, but you're not going to just, stare at the wall for an hour after that, collecting yourself.
This is entertainment first, and not just my soapbox for things that frighten me. And horror is entertaining. It is supposed to be fun. And I think one of the things very early on I said to everybody involved in this project is, this is just for fun. You can tap out at any moment. You can be as involved as you want, but we're just going to do something for fun. And it has still really been a lot of fun. And guys, I'm really, really grateful that you've joined me on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Cam.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and listeners, I am so grateful for your support. Like I said, the patrons completely pay for every single episode, even doubling our voice actors' contribution now at $10. That is fully funding the production of each episode, which lets us buy equipment and software and develop and get more and more silly and crazy. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any more questions, there's lots of ways to reach out to us. I'll put those in the show notes. Do you guys have anything you want to say before I sign off?
No, I was just going to say it's a fun time, and I'm glad we're doing it, even with all of us having day jobs and making it work. But it's still fun to do.
Yeah, and that's another reason that we have a monthly show and not a weekly show, is that we all balance this with a bunch of other stuff. And it is a delight. Phil, will you hit us with a stay tuned?
Stay tuned.
You have been listening to Carrier Wave, the behind-the-scenes podcast about observable radio. My name is Cameron Suey, and I've been joined by co-producers and co-writers Phil Van Hest and Purpurina. Our theme music is Unwind Wave by Tim Kulig. This show and every episode of Observable Radio are made possible and completely funded by listeners and patrons like yourself, and we can't thank you enough.